Hello, everybody. I'm back. It's Thursday night again, and it's time with Minutes of Milo show. And whoop, there we go. Just double sure making that it is going out over the airwaves, and it is, which is a good deal. So, before I was so rudely interrupted, it's the Minutes with Milo show, Thursday night edition. And if you've been around since the beginning, you may have known I used to do 2 nights a week, and cut back to 1 night a week. So here we are. Since I'm off on off on Fridays. Thursday's my Friday. I do it on Thursday nights. So, I can stay up a little later. I'm old, tired, getting sleepy. So I can stay up a little later and not have to get up and go to work the next day. Anyway, didn't have a show last week. Things happen, right? And I get busy. And then, I don't have time to, make up a show or just throw something together. And so, I took a break, which is okay. Uh, Tonight, I thought, it's been a while. I didn't look back and see exactly which show, but it's been a while since I have read or looked up in this Civil War book called The Civil War Years, a Day-to-Day Chronicle, and it's put together by Robert E. Denny. And so what this does is you look up the date. Of course, I don't say it's all, but because I haven't read the whole thing. But it deals with what's happening on a certain day in 1862, and it focuses on the Civil War. I think the last time we read some letters from some soldiers, it talked about what their pay was. We looked at what that meant in today's time, but it wasn't anything. It wasn't even enough to live on. But anyway, so I haven't read ahead, but I did look up. So there isn't really anything for October the 16th, and there's just a little bit on the 15th. So I went back to the 14th, and there's uh, a little bit more to read. So I think we're going to start and look at October the 14th, 1862, and see what it was saying about what was going on in the Civil War. And, some of these things are, like I said, letters from soldiers. Sometimes they're orders. Sometimes they're just almost written like a newspaper article about, troop movements or which regiment went to which town and what general was doing this and what captain was doing that. So some of it's just, you know, historical troop movements, how things were falling into place. Maybe there were people going to Washington, that kind of stuff. So we'll see what's going on tonight. Well, last time I did this, I had on my computer glasses. And these are glasses that let me see medium distances, but not up close. So I had to go and get my real glasses that are bifocals, progressives. And the thing I don't like about these is the reading part's down here in the bottom. If you're old and you got to wear bifocals, you understand this. So everything you're doing, you're looking up. So then you can look down through the lens. And the flatter it is in front of you, the higher you have to look. So I went and got these because I'm going to be reading, and I can't read out of those. They just don't help my eyeballs focus. So, all right. So October the 14th in 1862 was a Tuesday. Today's a Thursday, of course. So let's see what it says about this. Sometimes it might be a little hard to follow, but we'll see how it's going. I don't know whose voice this is or who's writing it. Maybe we'll find out. So today, I'm reading now. Today, elections held in several of the Midwestern states elected Democrats to Congress, except in Iowa, which was solidly Republican. Brigadier General James Birdseye McPherson today became a division commander in Grant's army. He would distinguish himself many times before he was killed outside of Atlanta. Spoiler alert, he got killed. All right, so this next bit was written by, I guess, Corporal Barber, D Company, 15th Illinois Volunteer Infantry, after Corinth, Tennessee. So maybe they had a battle in Corinth, Tennessee. He writes, General Herbert was now relieved of command and ordered to report to Jackson, Mississippi, to assume command of the military district. Brevet Brigadier General James B. McPherson to assume command of the division. When he assumed command, the boys were nearly all prejudiced against him, as they were against all West Point graduates, but out of dislike changed to esteem, amounted to almost veneration, and soon McPherson's name became synonymous with all that was good and noble. Troops began to concentrate here. I don't know why they made the print smaller all of a sudden. Troops began to concentrate here, and at the preparations were being made for a full campaign. Our decimated ranks were being filled up by new recruits under the 500,000 called in July. We now marched to LaGrange. We had not proceeded far before Colonel Turner received a dispatch announcing that his resignation had been accepted. The regiment halted, and with visible emotion he bade farewell to it. The boys on the march commented those acts of lawlessness. Oh, wait a minute. The boys on this march committed those acts of lawlessness which wanton soldiers indulge in. Amongst others, they burned the fences all along the route. All the efforts of the officers to find the incendiaries proved unavailing. On the third day, the regiment was back again in its old quarters. The 15th Regiment was soon detailed to guard Ball's Bridge, a place 1½ miles from camp. The boys on this march committed those acts of lawlessness which wanton soldiers indulge in. Amongst others, they burned the fences all along the route. Now, I know they had, split log fences and all that kind of stuff a lot. But what would it take to burn a whole fence? I mean, it wouldn't be like a fuse, right? Maybe, unless they poured kerosene on it somehow and, wet the wood down so that it would travel along the fence. I mean, you'd have to build, I don't know how many fires. Or maybe they just tore up the wood and threw it on the burning pile. I don't know. I don't know how you would burn a fence. All right, October the 15th, Wednesday. Okay, this is again the Corporal Barber, D Company, 15th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. Now they're at LaGrange, Tennessee. This was agreeable duty, as it enabled the boys to forage without being subject to the restraints of picket and camp rules. A good number of the boys went into a private speculation by confiscating cotton and then selling it on the sly. About this time, the 95th Illinois joined the Army. 7 companies of the regiment were raised in McHenry County and 3 in Boone, and many of our friends and acquaintances were in it, among whom I will mention Oshel Eddy, Whiff Mulroy, Dan Mitchell, and Jimmy Williams. The 72nd Illinois Infantry was now added to our brigade, making it all 5 regiments still under command of General Vetch, whom the boys had learned to love as a father, but they had not yet gotten over the disposition to play off jokes on him. Preparations were now made for a forward movement, and soon Grant's army was on the move. The enemy retreated in great haste as we were advancing. Near Holly Springs, we got a slight skirmish out of the rear guard. When we arrived at the place, Colonel Rogers was offered the position to command the post and garrison it with his regiment, but he preferred to accompany the army and that traitor Murphy of the 109th Illinois was left in command. This next bit is written by Private Jackman. The Orphan Brigade is en route to Kentucky to Cumberland Gap, and he writes, all things being ready, broke up camp and marched 12 miles towards Cumberland Gap. All marched with a buoyant step. There was no straggling, and the column kept well closed up. Colonel Hanson in command of the brigade. We went into camp before sundown and pitched our tents with regular order. We were going to Kentucky in grand style. Then October the 17th was a Friday. This is written again by Private Jackman from the Orphan Brigade en route to Kentucky. To Cumberland Gap. When the column got fairly out of the road this morning, a courier came dashing up to General Breckinridge and handing him a dispatch. We were ordered back and pitched our tents on old grounds. Various rumors are afloat about camp as to the cause of our delay. Some say that Bragg had been whipped and is retreating from Kentucky. Others say he has captured a large lot of supplies and is sending a large wagon train through the gap. That we shall have to wait until passages and various other rumors are going around. Sunday, October the 19th. Yesterday, near Lexington, Kentucky, the cavalry of John Hunt Morgan defeated a Union cavalry force, entered the city, captured the garrison, patrolled the prisoners, and went away. Bragg's columns reached the Cumberland Gap and began moving through. This would take several days with the long wagon trains of confiscated grain, herds of cattle, etc. he was moving. Private Jackman of the Orphan Brigade writes, early struck tents and with heads all lowly bending, marched 50 miles towards Knoxville, camped where we did the first night out, going to Kentucky. The boys not so cheerful today as when going on the road the other way. They didn't keep up so well. So what I can gather from some of that is they were delayed before, I think on Friday, he said. And I think part of it was because, like some of the rumors had said, there was a lot of supplies captured and they were holed up waiting for them to catch up. Because, let's see. On October the 19th, which was a Sunday, he wrote, or it was written in here, Bragg's columns reached the Cumberland Gap and began moving through. This would take several days with the long wagon trains of confiscated grains, herds of cattle, etc. he was moving. And previously, on Friday, one of the rumors were, some say that Bragg had been whipped and was retreating from Kentucky. Others say he has captured a large lot of supplies and is sending a large wagon train through the gap. So, he did capture some supplies and was sending a wagon train through the gap. And that's the reason on the 17th they had to stop and wait, because then I guess they were protecting him as they went through Cumberland Gap. So that panned out for him. All right, let's see. Get my glasses on. October the 21st, Tuesday. Lincoln ordered Major General John A. McClellan, one of the Illinois' political generals, to reorganize a force in Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa to assault Vicksburg. McClellan went to work with a will, believing that he would have a free hand in the campaign and make his name. He organized the units and sent them south to Grant's army. There they were assigned to Sherman's group, which was to assault Vicksburg via Yazoo River. Where was I? The talk over the assignment would last for years after the war, but the immediate result was dissension in Grant's army. The mail steamer Gladiator had been attacked by guerrillas early on October the 19th. Today, the USS Louisville, Lieutenant Commander Meade, in company the steamer Meteor, landed Army troops in Bledsoe's Landing and Hamblin's Landing, Arkansas. The towns were burned in reprisal. Meade reported to Admin D.D. Porter that the people along the riverbank were duly informed that every outrage by the guerrillas upon packers would be similarly dealt with. The people along the riverbank were duly informed that every outrage by the guerrillas upon packers would be similarly dealt with. You know, I read some of this, and some of the names are really different than what you would expect. I mean, literally, I guess, in the 1800s, there were still a lot of, I don't know, man, I don't know what kind of names would you call some of these things. The places. Of course, everybody knows, Grant and Sherman. There's Commander Meade. I can't really figure out why some of the names, some of the places names, and all that kind of stuff were so different, or in my mind different. Of course, I guess, I'm not dealing from where I'm at, southern names, but up north, Illinois, those places, I guess, totally different, naming context up there. I don't know, but some of them were hard to read. But there wasn't really much going on these few days. Like I covered October the 14th through October the 21st. Now that wasn't a day by day, so it went from 14 to 15 to 17 to 19 to 21. So they were all moving through, well, I guess different groups. Some of them were in Kentucky. Some of them, were heading towards Knoxville. Then some of them were up, I call it up north in Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. Of course, I guess Iowa may not be up north. Freehand campaign. He organized units sent to South Grant's army. Sherman's group assaulted Vicksburg, Yazoo River. The mail steamer Gladiator had been attacked. Okay, so mail steamer Gladiator had been attacked by guerrillas early on October the 19th. So I guess mail steamer is like a, maybe now that I read it again, looks like it might be a mail boat, a mail carrier. They call it a steamer, which is, I'm sure, is a type of boat. Attacked by guerrillas. October the 19th, which was a Sunday. That was the time that the cavalry of John Hunt Morgan defeated a Union cavalry force, entered the city, captured the garrison, controlled the prisoners, and went away. I don't know what city. Louisville. Yesterday near Lexington, Kentucky. Okay. So they were fighting around, it's just hard to believe how the troop movement, they moved on foot by train and not, horseback. But the regular army guys, the foot soldiers, they didn't ride horses. They walked. And I can't imagine walking through these states mile after mile on the, poor condition of the roads and all that, on, meager supplies. It's just, hard to believe, with some of the stuff they put up with and some of the stuff that they did in the Civil War. And, when I read it before, it talked about the little bit of salary they got and were happy to get. It's just hard to believe by today's standards, that was going on. And I won't say people were happy about it, but people were accepting of it, or soldiers were accepting of it. They did their best, So one of the things, let's see if we can get a little more information. I was intrigued by what Private Jackman wrote, and he was part of the Orphan Brigade. Let's see. I want to ask Gemini, what was the Orphan Brigade during the Civil War? Okay, the Orphan Brigade was a popular nickname for the 1st Kentucky Brigade, a renowned and hard-fighting Confederate unit during the American Civil War. It earned its unique nickname for two primary interconnected reasons. Political isolation. The soldiers were primarily recruited from Kentucky, a crucial border state that declared official neutrality and ultimately remained in the Union. By enlisting in the Confederate Army, these soldiers were forced to cross the state border into Tennessee to organize. This meant they were cut off from their homes and families in the Union state for the entire war, leading them to feel orphaned by their native Commonwealth. I guess back then, Kentucky was a Commonwealth. Second reason, devastating losses. The brigade suffered very heavy casualties and the loss of multiple commanders throughout the war. The nickname was famously cemented at the Battle of Stone River, Murfreesboro, in January 1863. After a devastating charge that cost the unit over a third of its men, their former commander, Major General John C. Breckinridge, lamented the loss of his men, reportedly crying out, "My poor orphans, my poor orphans." Some more facts. The corps of the brigade consisted of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 9th Kentucky Infantry Regiments along with several Kentucky artillery batteries. The initial commander, the first and most popular commander, was John C. Breckinridge, former Vice President of the United States. Interesting. They fought in many of the major engagements in the Western Theater, including the Battle of Shiloh, the Siege of Vicksburg, which they talked about in here, the Battle of Stone River, and the Battle of Chickamauga. The Orphan Brigade campaigned over more territory, suffering higher casualties, and lost more brigade commanders than almost any other comparable unit in the Confederate armies of the Tennessee. One of their brigadier generals, John H. Helm, was the brother-in-law of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. Adding a personal layer of tragedy to the war, Helm was mortally wounded at the Battle of Chickamauga. I don't know. The brigade served until the end of the war, eventually surrendering in Washington, Georgia, in May 1865. And it has a little video. So, that was interesting. Why they call them the Orphan Brigade, which they had a couple of, remarks in the daily writings of these guys. See, I can't even see with these glasses on. I can barely read with my other glasses on. Not a lot of light. The light here is designed to shoot my face, not down on the book. That's the reason I have to hold it up a little bit, tilt it, and look at it. So, I'm not a particular history buff. I find interesting, the facts. What was it like in 1862? What were these guys doing? What did they have to put up with? Like burning a fence. How do you do that? How did you get your name, the Orphan Brigade? I find that stuff interesting. Not so much about troop movements or battles or, any of that historical, history about the war. I think it's more interesting about the conditions, logistics, how did they move around, how did they get supplies, all that kind of stuff. If you ever looked on the internet and you see pictures of, an area during the Civil War times, most of the time the land is almost clear cut, meaning there are no trees. And sometimes you can find, an area where a battle took place, and there'll be images of it during the, the Civil War time, and then images later. Totally different place, totally different look. Because, in my mind, I've never read this, but I think back in Civil War, lots of things revolved around trees, wood. How did you heat something? How did you cook something? How did you build something? What was it made of? Wood, right? Wagons, houses, barns, fences, all that stuff. And in order to build a fence, you cut your trees, and made fence posts out of them. That's why they're, a split log fence, because they didn't want to use big trees to make a fence. They'd split it up into more manageable pieces. It would go further, and they made their fences out of that. Not just the posts, but the actual fencing. So, everything back in those times just about used wood to make it, to heat it, to cook it, like I said, all that kind of stuff. So when these guys would camp, they probably chopped down a lot of trees and did some, you couldn't burn green wood. but you could make stuff out of it, or build shelters with some of the smaller trees and all that kind of stuff. So very interesting. If you get to look at pictures of the time of the Civil War, you'll notice it's just hills are kind of clear cut. The land is clear cut as much as they could do, and now everything's so much greener because we have so many different materials to make stuff from, and to heat our homes and to build homes. Yeah, you got wood, but it's all farm wood. It's all, you just don't go out in the woods here and cut the trees down and make logs out of it, make timber out of it, and build your house out of it. You just don't do it. So, but anyway, just something to look back, find interesting things about the Civil War, about that time, pretty much more than anything. Not, like I said, not so much about how the war was fought or any of that stuff. Just the conditions. A lot of times they talk about traveling by train. These guys were probably on foot, but anyway. So I appreciate you watching. It's a pretty short one, 30 minutes, and if you've made it this far, I appreciate it. Leave me a comment, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tell your friends and neighbors about it. But anyway, I appreciate you coming. And if you watched it live, thanks a lot. If you watched it later on, I appreciate you still. But anyway, until next Thursday, I want to have to say au revoir, auf Wiedersehen. Ciao, baby. Ciao. That's Italian, I think. But anyway.